Hi everyone, it's Kathy for Not Too Shabby, and I am super excited to share this card today for a couple of reasons. First and foremost is this stamp set called Pup in a Cup by Not Too Shabby. The images were actually hand drawn by Jamie, the owner of NotTooShabbyShop.com, and I just think that it is super adorable and so sweet. So I'm be using that stamp set, obviously. I'll also be using border dies from CC Designs, as well as the 6x9 striped stencils from Trinity Stamps. Don't worry about writing down all of the measurements. I'll have everything listed in the description box below, including the products that I used, as well as the Copic markers that I used. So to start out, we're going to make the pieces of the front of the card. So to do this, you'll need a piece of cardstock that measures 3.5 by 3 inches. And I stenciled the vertical stripes, well, technically they're horizontal, but I'm stenciling them vertically. And I used Mint to Be ink by Catherine Pooler with a makeup brush. And I did use a lot of I did use a lot of ink because I really wanted those stripes to stand out. After I had the stenciling done, I pulled out my scoreboard and I scored it at 1/2 inch, and then I scored it at 1.25 inch. Now you want to make sure that it's the 3-inch side that's lined up at the top of your scoreboard. You also want to make sure that you do a pretty deep score and burnish it really well for the awning. For the bottom part of the front panel of the card, to create the countertop, I used another piece of cardstock that measures 3.5 by 3. And again, I scored that one at 1/2 inch. And again, I made sure that the 3-inch side was lined up with the top of my scoreboard. And again, you want to make sure that you really burnish those score lines. Next, I pulled out a scallop border die from CC Designs and lined up the scallops with my little ink blended stripes and ran that through my Gemini Junior machine. For the front panel of the card, I used a piece of cardstock that measures 3.5 by 8.5. I thought about using liquid glue, but liquid glue is, not my friend. So I just used my tape runner and adhered the awning up at the top. Make sure that when you are applying the adhesive that you do it above the 1/2 inch score line for the awning, and then below the 1/2 inch score line for the counter at the bottom of the front card panel there. Once I had those pieces adhered in place, I set that off to the side so I could stamp and color this super cute pup in a cup. I just can't even stand it. He's so cute. I stamped him out onto a piece of Cougar Super Smooth cardstock, and I used Catherine Pooler Midnight ink, which, if you've been watching my videos, you know that I've used a different ink when doing Copic coloring, but yeah, this Midnight ink is just awesome. I stamped that image one time and got a perfectly crisp image, including those really solid parts for the little puppy dog's eyes. So I'm really, really liking this ink. Anyway, back to the coloring. For the little pup, I started with, what did I start with? E44. And I added that around the areas where it would be the darkest, like at the bottom of his paws and then on the sides of his jowls. I guess those are jowls, or the front of his face. And I used the E44 very sparingly because I didn't want it to completely overtake my little pup in a cup. Next, I came in with E43 and blended out the E44 a tiny little bit. I wanted to soften the E44, but I wanted to leave a lot of white space for my lightest color, which is E42. So when I came in with the E42, I pretty much just filled in all of the white space that I had left after the E43. Moving on to his little snout and his ears, I started with W6 and put that, at the bottom of his ears, and then his ears along that are right next to his face, and then just to highlight the little dip in his ears up at the top, I did do a little V mark right there, and Jamie actually drew that little dip in, so it makes it really easy to add in those extra little details. Once I was done with W6, I blended that out a little bit with W4. And again, I left a pretty fair amount of white space, especially on the front of his white face. Did I say white face? I meant white space. Especially on the front of his face where his muzzle is, so that I could fill that in with W3. For the inside of his mouth, I used R20. It's just a small little opening, so just one color for that. For his little nose, I added just a little bit of C7 at the bottom, and I left the top white. And I went in with C3 thinking that it would leave a nice highlight, but it turned out to be too light, so I changed my mind and went back with C5 and then blended it just a tiny little bit more with the C7. Once I was done coloring in the pup, I started working on the cup, and I started with R83. And I added that on the outer edges of the cup, and I'm skipping the centerpiece where the koozie or cozy, I still don't know what those things are called. I skipped the center part where the koozie is because I'm gonna cover that up a little bit later. Anyway, I started with R83 and went down the sides of the cup and then flicked towards the middle just a tiny little bit. I didn't want that color to completely overtake. Then I came in with RV11 and I brought that pretty far to the center. I'm going for a center highlight on this cup because it's a round object. I did leave white space down the center so that I could have that nice center highlight. And to fill in the white space on the center of the mug, of the cup, I used RV10. And my RV10 is getting low on ink and I don't have a refill for it. So I had to be pretty quick with it because I don't want to ruin the nib. Anyway, I just blended down the center of that cup to fill in that white space, and then I did do 2 coats just to get a really nice blend for that. Then I decided that the R83 on the outer edges of the cup wasn't quite dark enough. So I came in with RV34 and did the rim of the cup, like around the back side of the rim of the cup. And then I darkened up the outer edges of the cup just to have that scary dark color, as Courtney Cougar calls it. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I always think that my darkest is going to be dark enough and it never is. So lesson to be learned, I suppose. Maybe if I think it's dark enough, just go darker anyway, so I don't have to go back and add another color later. Anyway, it all worked out. So after I added in that RV34, I blended it out a little bit with the R83, and then I blended that out even more with the RV11. Once I was done coloring in the cup, I did the foam for the coffee, and I started with E50 and just did a very tiny little bit of the E50, mostly where there's little, I guess to explain, there's like little puffs, like little cloudy type drawing in there. So that's where I concentrated the E50, like around those little bumps. And then I blended that out with E00. I set that off to the side and grabbed a piece of craft cardstock so that I could stamp the cozy or koozie or the wrapper, whatever. And I did fussy cut that out. And the way the image is drawn, it's really easy to do fussy cutting. She drew the images with thicker lines, so if you cut into the stamped line, it doesn't really matter that much. Now for the koozie, I did cut right up against the stamped line because I'm going to do a little bit of paper piecing. And I couldn't decide what I was going to do with it, so I decided just to add highlights to my little pug's eyes with a white gel pen. And then I pulled out my paper crimper. Now, this is a tool that has been in my stash for at least 100 years. I don't know if they even make them anymore, but I thought it would be perfect to run the little cozy through that just to get that corrugated look. And then just to add a little bit more dimension, I grabbed my vintage photo distress ink pad and a blending tool and did a light coat over the areas of the cozy that were raised up after running it through the paper crimper. And I added a little bit of ink around the edges as well. Next, I ran a small scrap of Neenah 80-pound cardstock through my Gemini Junior with the Cloudy Frames dies from Pekin, Maine. I lined it up in my misty so that I could stamp my sentiment. The sentiments that I used are sending you pugs and kisses, and I added the little heart there just to fill in that little bit of space. And I just colored the heart in really quick with the R83 marker. So for the frame, I used a Copic marker. I used BG34 and just colored it so that it would match my awning. And I made sure to do 2 or 3 coats on the top of the frame, and then I did run the tip of the marker on the inside of the frame as well as on the outside of the frame just to get rid of any white edges. After I was done with my little sign, I decided that I wanted to add that little heart to my cup. And I was a little bit leery about doing it because, quite frankly, I am kind of the queen of overdue. And so I was really very careful on how many hearts I stamped. I did use Memento Rosebud Ink, and I thought that that color was perfect because it was more of a tone on tone, so it didn't end up, so the hearts didn't end up standing out like way too much. It was just a cute little subtle pattern, and I'm very proud that I didn't overdo it with the hearts. Next, I took a water-based black marker and just ran that around the edges of both the pup in a cup and the little koozie. And if you do Copic coloring, you do want to make sure that you use a water-based marker to go around the edges so it doesn't bleed into your Copic markers. I used a little bit of liquid glue to adhere my koozie down, and because it went through the paper crimper, obviously it shrunk it, so I just pulled it out to stretch it a little bit so that it would fit end to end. Next, I took my panel with the awning and the countertop and used my tape runner to adhere that to the front of my Slimline card. For my card base, I used 110-pound Neenah Classic Crest cardstock cut to 8.5 by 7. Then I scored it at 3.5 inches on the 7-inch side. So the finished card is 3.5 by 8.5. I used liquid glue to adhere my little sign down on the bottom below the countertop. And then for my little pup in a cup, I doubled up some foam tape and adhered him in place. And as you can see, you can flatten out the awning and you can flatten out the countertop, so it will go into an envelope and mail flat, and then when the recipient opens, all they have to do is puff up the awning and puff up the counter, and the counter and the awning, they'll hold their shape once those score lines are reinforced a little bit. And on my awning, I noticed that it wasn't really standing up quite the way I wanted it to, so I pushed it up and folded it on the very top there at the first score line, and I just burnished it really well again, and this time I just used an acrylic block because my bone folder was already put away, and that really helped kind of pop up that awning a little bit more. And that's it. That finishes up my card for today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, I'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.